All right. We're expecting 30 to 40 students on the call today with us, maybe more. Actually, there's already 40 on the call, so we should have more than that. First, I'd just like to welcome all of you and say thank you for being here. All the presenters, obviously, and then also those of you who are considering graduate school, here or elsewhere or both, and trying to make your minds up about what your next step needs to be. And our purpose with this is to help you. And we hope that the information we provide will help and encourage you to continue what you started and to finish your accredited degree and move on into the workplace, or back in academics, whatever you prefer, in a successful way that fits the 21st century demand. So before we get started, I just want to introduce kind of everybody here and what their role is. My name is Derek Wade. I'll be trying to run the chat part. So if you have questions, I will try to either answer them on the chat or give those questions to the panel as the panel begins to field questions. We are recording this, Brandon and David, so we can make that available to you guys afterwards, at some point afterwards, so you don't have to record tonight. I'd like to introduce Stephen Dominguez, who's our graduate advisor. Steve, can just wave everybody, make sure everybody knows who you are, and Gary, who's our recruiter, helping keep things moving, and Oscar and Lindsay, who aren't here, but they've done a lot of work in preparing our graphics and that kind of thing for you. The templates and things used by our presenters are put together by them. Our speakers today and the source of most of your information today, we'll start with Dr. Dora Epstein-Jones, who is our chair. You know her, you know all the speakers probably. Our panel is made up of Dr. Christine Stefani, Kalechi Chigbu, who is a recent graduate, Peter Robb, architect, he's one of our professors, and Brian Brummett, who is a current graduate student, and Dr. Julie Zook, who is also here at the College of Architecture. Once we have the panelists speak and make the presentations, we'll take a few minutes and give you the chance to ask them questions. After I'll probably have you wrap up the questions about 6:15, and then we'll turn the time over to our Dean, Jim Williamson, for concluding remarks at that point. So we'll go ahead and begin then with Dr. Jones, Dr. Dora Epstein-Jones.
Thanks, Derek. Hi, students, and thank you to the rest of this panel today. I'm looking at my notes if I look like I'm looking at the side right here. Thank you for coming to the open house. We're here today in large part to kind of continue a discussion that we started last time. I don't have the cool and groovy COA background. But I am showing you a project from my own personal background. This is a cogeneration plant that I did with Wes Jones a number of years ago, and it was a very long project. And I bring it to you as an image because I want to reinforce that what Texas Tech MARC program is emphasizing now within its new curriculum, its new kind of relaunch, is research in architecture. And this particular project was a massive research project, in part research that was related to what the office was doing, already in terms of design research, which at that point was in the reuse and redeployment of prefabricated and available parts in the market, without kind of specific build requirements, and the attempt to kind of recraft and reuse using these already manufactured parts. So this is part of our design research for that, for which our firm had a number of patents on reusing parts, everything from shipping containers to deployable interior divider systems. And then that combined with all of the work that we had to do to make a cogeneration plant in a tight university site. And if it were not for the agility of our team to be able to conduct the level of research that we had to do in order to make this, it would not have been, it just would have been an impossible project for our office. And that research is not just merely the kind of like, form or form generation. There's a lot of speculation in this project, but also the rigor, the asking of hypotheses, making, testing assumptions, going after kind of small research opportunities to try to prove basic assumptions that went into this project. And my hope for you as you start at graduate programs, and especially would you take a look at the Texas Tech program as it is now evolving, is I hope that you understand how important research has become to the MArch graduate degree, to the professional degree, to the profession itself in the 21st century. This was finished, Chiller Plant, as it's called, was finished in 2003, 2002, somewhere around there. But it was started, boy, it was started in the 1990s. It took us a long time. And it was kind of a forerunner of how now most offices operate. And so as you go on to get your professional degree, and get your professional degree, get your professional degree, get your professional degree, get licensed, move towards licensure, seize that power. And as you move to seize that power, recognize that this takes your work to a higher level than where it was. The one thing I can tell you about the new graduate program at Texas Tech is that it's not just kind of more of the same that you've already been through if you're here and you've already been through it for 4 years. It is a significantly advanced program in architectural research. And I'm glad that our panel is here to discuss all of that. So if you have any specific questions for me, or if you need me to go over the curriculum in a specific way, I'm happy to do that. And I'd be thrilled to have you come and be a part of this tremendous opportunity at Texas Tech to pursue a 21st century MArch degree. Thank you. Derek?
Thank you, Dr. X. Bean Jones. We really appreciate that. Let's go ahead and move forward now with Dr. Stefani. Are you prepared to make your remark, share your screen?
Yes. Okay, let's see. All right. Okay, so I don't use PowerPoint, but I have a PowerPoint presentation. Where do I do view entire? Let's see.
You can hit F5 and it'll turn it into slideshow.
Oh, I'm on a Mac.
Oh, well, just click slideshow.
Got it. Okay, great. So I'm Christine Stefani, and I'm also would be really excited if you decided to continue your studies at Texas Tech. I would say just to extend what Dr. Epstein-Jones mentioned, you could think about coming to Texas Tech if you're interested in what architecture will become. not really what it was. And when I was putting together this very brief, and I think we have 5 minutes, right? Otherwise, just mute me, Derek. I think when I was putting together this very brief slide presentation, I was thinking about deciding to pursue a master's degree. And at the time, I was coming from a background in fine arts, so I wasn't really sure if architecture was the right path. And indeed, architecture was the right path, but it wasn't the right path. So I ended up pursuing a PhD in urbanism, so that I didn't necessarily have to commit to architecture. So I really do both. So I'm a registered architect, and I know how to build buildings. I work for Studio Game and HOK and have a robust career in that dimension. But I'm also an urbanist for spatial justice. So I work in the area of civic data activism in Brazil. So my primary research is in Latin America. I also did a Fulbright in Latin America, again, because I was attempting to figure out sort of this gray area between urbanism and architecture. And I would say I come from another institution whereby planning and architecture were separate. And so if you have any sort of interest in blurring the lines between those two disciplines, there's a tremendous opportunity at Tech because urbanism is nested within architecture. And that's beneficial for really understanding how to use spatial transformation to make social change. So if you're someone who's looking at urbanism, planning does a lot of quantitative metrics, but not necessarily spatial transformation. So there is a tremendous opportunity at Tech to really get into urban design and understand more nuanced links with architecture. So I'll just talk about these 3 areas where I operate. I'm going to talk about the Latin American studios and the Latin American Urban Design Lab that I lead here at Texas Tech. And then I'll talk about SHAPA, which is my civic data lab that I started in the context of a National Science Foundation postdoctoral fellowship at UT. And then I'll very briefly talk about a critical practice that I'm a partner of and I've had since 2015. So my teaching and research focus mostly on housing and urbanization in Latin America. And I focus on civic data for design justice. And my focus is marginalized communities. You can define those as any community that is very broadly vulnerable to urbanization, whether that's in Texas, in anywhere in the United States, anywhere in the world. But I specifically focus on Latin America. That's where I've been working for the last 20 years. And the second area that I really work on is engaged research. So in Latin America, I'm interested in really using the studio and seminars as a way to advance research that involves communities so that we can explore the agency of design for advancing design justice. So these are the main themes around which I work in Latin America. I teach topical studios, so I'm on my 4th one, but I've taught topical studios in Brazil, Ecuador, and Mexico. And those topical studios mostly focus on the intersection between incremental, which are self-help, auto-constructed forms of housing, and the megacity. So I look at how these sort of thresholds between how housing is constructed by people and how designers respond and transform those patterns to make new ones, in short. And so the studios are really involved in multiple dimensions of this work. We use computational methods to begin to think about where infrastructure operates in the city and how. We also engaged very immersive field work to engage research directly in communities at the margins of cities. And we visit architectural offices to understand how architects and urbanists in Latin America actually practice and actually build housing. And we have reviews. We meet Pritzker Prize architects at their amazing projects. And we, most importantly, get into the question of how do you begin to transform and work within environments that have already been built. So many times in the modernist tradition, or as you're an architect, you think you're going to start with a blank slate. So that is the opposite of what I do most of the time. I mostly work with communities that have already been built. And so there's a negotiation of how do you begin to unbuild and rebuild these areas that have been accumulating over time. And so that's really the focus of these Latin American studios. I'm going to show you very briefly this a website. So I'm going to stop share and then share again. Let's see, to talk about civic data. And this is an area of my work that started with a postdoctoral fellowship after my PhD, where I really looked at how buildings were constructed in informal settlements. The postdoc was really about thinking about the thresholds between communities and built environments. How do communities begin to engage the experience of built environments, use different types of data, different types of community-led research to get what they need and make decisions. So I formed this, it's a civic data design lab, and it links with Latin American Housing Network at University of Texas. So all of these people have been involved in the project over time. This is the Latin American Urban Design Lab here that I've been leading for the last 2 years. And these are some students. So you'll see a couple of students here, Darian and Jesus, who have worked on this project. Leo is an architecture student in Sao Paulo. So he works with the Sao Paulo studio currently going on right now. And so this is a lab that, I'll show you some of the projects. It is at the boundaries of architecture and urbanism. So we do everything from focus on mapping COVID in order to help communities better distribute resources to those in need. So that's one of the projects that we're working with the University of Sao Paulo on. As a way to begin to look at where COVID is happening and then how we can begin to think about housing density in light of COVID. So this is just a small glimpse of what I do in terms of civic data, and I'm happy to talk more about that. So I'm gonna go back to my other presentation and then finish up. Let's see. Okay. And the last area that I operate is critical practice. So I also have, as I mentioned, I'm a registered architect. I've been practicing for 15 years, but I've had my own practice with Jason Sowell for the last 5 years. We have several projects. One is a private residence in the Catskills right now. The second one is a private residence in Michigan. And this project I'm most proud of. It's a very long project. I think Dr. Epstein-Jones is right in saying these projects, when they involve research or they involve community, or they're messy or they involve wicked problems, they simply take time. So this project started in 2013 pro bono, and we got a small contract in 2018, but essentially it's a public park project in Austin, Texas. And the project involved essentially regenerating one of the only plots of land left in the Runberg area. It started with a participatory process, and we recently won a Texas Society of Architects Studio Award for this project. And this is just a rendering or an image of the project. And the project was really, again, at this intersection between architecture and urbanism. And for that reason, just to reemphasize, I think that engaging these kinds of questions within an architecture school presents a tremendous opportunity for you to think about the multiple paths that you can pursue throughout your life as relates to design, whether it nudges closer to highly technical dimensions of architecture or urbanism. But Texas Tech has that particular characteristic, and so would be happy to talk to any of you about that further if you have interest. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Stefani. Kelechi, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you to Professor Wade for the invitation. Um, so talking about my graduate experience at the COA, I got my undergraduate degree at the COA as well. And so when it came to me making the decision as to where, oh, pardon me, my name is Kale Chichiwu, and I'm a recent graduate student from the COA. I graduated this past August with my master's in architecture with certifications in business and the urban and community design certification. Um, and so when deciding my when making the decision as to whether I was to continue with the graduate COA program or move to a different graduate program, some of the factors that I considered were the fact that I had gotten my undergraduate degree from the COA. And so I had been in Lubbock already for 4 years. I had kind of developed the community of people inside the COA and outside of the COA that were very important to me and important to my journey at Tech and within the College of Architecture. Um, and alongside that, the College of Architecture offered an opportunity for considering the MBA program and the architecture program as a dual degree program, which is something that I was interested in off the bat and something that I wanted to kind of dive into deeper. Um, and so those were I guess, the two main reasons as to why I decided to continue on ahead with the COA. Now coming into the grad school program, things kind of took a different path for me. I didn't end up getting the MBA dual degree program, but kind of was introduced to the certifications. And I think that's something that makes the graduate program at the College of Architecture really strong. The fact that you have the three disciplines of urban planning, digital design and fabrication, and then the health program as well. I'm not sure if things have changed with the new graduate program, but that was something that was really interesting to me and also helped me solidify my decision in terms of what direction I wanted my architecture career to take. And what you're seeing on here on the screen was actually my studio with Dr. Christine Stefani, which was one of the studios that was very dear to my heart at the COA, because it kind of introduced me to this idea of housing and community development, which is where my interests lie primarily in architecture. And so getting the opportunity to take that studio was very helpful. This studio also had a travel attachment to it, although we didn't get the opportunity to actually go because it happened whilst the pandemic was ongoing. And so we didn't get to travel, but I know that within the graduate program, each studio, there is a travel requirement for a particular studio where the COA funds the I guess it funds the entire travel arrangement for the students. This particular studio was in Mexico City. And so if the pandemic didn't happen, we would have gotten the opportunity to visit Mexico City and kind of explore that area as well. And that's also something that is special about the COA, is that there's that connection with outside factors of architecture and outside sources of architecture as well, that kind of links back to some of the things that we do in studio and in the College of Architecture. Another highlight of my experience was towards the end of my degree program. I got the opportunity to teach, be a teaching assistant for one of the professors, which was also something that was very interesting and helpful in terms of developing my career path, and also helped in exposing me to not just being confined to the classroom and some of the projects that we experience, but also kind of that creating that interrelationship between a graduate student and a first year student. So this, I co-taught a first year studio at the time. And that was something that I really enjoyed and something that was really helpful. And throughout these experiences, I got the opportunity to also solidify relationships with a couple of professors, which is something that wasn't necessarily there for me with my undergraduate experience, but coming into grad school, having that opportunity was really helpful and foundational for me. I took a research class actually with Professor Mary Alice, and that also focused on some of my interests in urban planning and community development within architecture um, and design. And I think one of the things that um, the graduate program really helped solidify for me is figuring out what aspect of architecture that I wanted to um, go into and what aspect of architecture that I wanted to explore outside of school and as I move into my professional career. Um, um, so over here on my screen is the project that I did for the Urban Design and Planning Studio. And this was a site in Mexico City. Um, and it really began to explore incremental housing, like Professor Dr. Christine Stefani had mentioned in her presentation, and some of the ways in which there can be a relationship between incremental housing and the surrounding factors that, or surrounding communities that are engaged with some of the people that occupy these vulnerable sites. And I think that's it for me for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelechi. We appreciate that. Peter, are you ready?
I am. Yeah, I was on Kalichi's final review and Dr. Stefani's. It was a really fantastic class and project. Let me find my PowerPoint. Again, yes, thank you very much for inviting me. It's happy to be here. I realize I have to share my screen first before I make it full screen. I've been teaching here for a couple of years. I'm an associate professor and architect here, licensed in Texas and Florida. And I've been teaching in the graduate program for quite a number of years, mostly teaching some integrative design studios, which tend to be the first within the first year. We've also had the luxury and the opportunity to teach a couple of topical studios dealing with tall buildings. So I think a lot of you are just looking at the names. A few of you were either in my technology class earlier today, like last hour, or last year. So thank you for inviting me. And so in the graduate program, well, I guess first I should talk about some experience. So I have a Bachelor of Design, a 4-year degree, a non-professional degree from the University of Florida. So similar to probably many of you. And I always knew I wanted to be a licensed architect. So I decided to go back for a Master's of Architecture and get a specialization in sustainable design. And I went from Florida, moved to Texas. Really haven't left very much, even though I did go to London for a couple of years to work for Foster & Partners on some larger projects. But most of the projects here are from Mexico or Austin, and a couple from Casablanca and Europe when I was working over there. But I'm very much interested in architecture and the building and what the opportunities for design that lie in both the conceptual development of an idea and ideations, but also into the materiality and what the presence of architecture can mean for people, for lifestyle, for other things, and you can see a couple of, this is a couple of examples of things looking at Adobe or wood or rammed earth. And in some of the undergraduate classes, we actually do look at some of those materials and explore them. But today I want to talk a little bit about just 3 classes. Kind of one thing is one thing I do in graduate studios. So how I teach graduate studios is a little different than undergrad. Then speaking specifically about an integrated design studio, which I've taught in the past couple of years, and then tall building studios. So looking at a topical design studio and really focusing on building complexity, or possibly even building a city within a building. So looking at mixed use, and this is a project from a class I'm teaching right now with Dr. Peng Du, where we're integrating some ideas. We're bringing in experts from Gensler and SOM and Softies architects, and also Ove Arup. So engineers and architects from Chicago, Houston, and Cambridge to lecture to the class, talk about the tall buildings, how they've designed tall buildings, and explore things. So really trying to bring in the research component and also connection to practice and to things that are going on, not just in Lubbock or in Texas, but things going on within the world. So one of the some of the design objectives I really see important is for the students to really work through their ideas, to really formulate an idea, a concept, and then bring that into fruition of how would you actually construct this? What types of materials would you layer? How do you begin to create space, or types of ambiances, atmospheres on the interior or exterior, and what is the presence within the local and also maybe kind of larger environments. But one thing we really do a lot is mapping. So mapping systems, whether those might be the sun angles and or typologies within the city. This student, again, this is from this semester, a group, Haley Arthur and Mark Eisenman, are working on a tall building, and they're really interested in agriculture and how to create an architecture for downtown Lubbock that actually increases production, healthy lifestyles, etc. And they started by mapping different the amounts of daylight within their system. So again, taking analytics and taking analysis of the climate, and how does that translate or transform architecture. So we can see here, so probably some systems and some types of diagrams that you might have seen in undergrad, and graduate really, I think, gives you the opportunity to really take some of those understandings and layer them back in together with the architectural design prompt and class. So this is actually paired with when I say integrative, it's also integrated with a 3-credit seminar, which they're looking at daylight analysis, heat island effect, other climatic and sustainable, I would call them sustainable ideas. So they were looking at each floor plate and testing, this is probably from about 6 weeks ago, testing how much light enters the skin. So they're talking about this skin and this atrium to create a space to grow things. So light is very, very important to them. But also mapping the systems, whether they be ecological. So this is looking, again, this is last fall, looking at a Mackenzie Lake and the park, or also mapping how water might move through the system, through the architecture or structure, and how the program, I think all of these things are inherently complex, but how do you begin to distill those larger ideas into architecture, and through the diagram begin to explain complexity simply. And then we really try to, this is Integrated Design Studio from last fall, really trying to understand how the building would go together, how we would have these amazing spa spaces and pool spaces. This student really wanted to float the pool above the entrance. How do we do that? So using some of my expertise and also working with engineers and other people to to understand how this would actually be constructed in, quote, the real world. And then also thinking about how we begin to describe technical information in a way that speaks about the spatial complexity or the spatial environments that, that the architecture creates. And then beginning to think about how to pull that together and render this, these ideas. A second project, this is a topical design studio. So looking at, this is from last spring. This student was very much interested in the garden in the city. So we went to New York. We got to go there just before COVID hit. That's really a great 5-day trip where we talked to local architects and just experienced the city and moved through it. And she began, Taylor looked at how to build densely within this borough in New York City in Manhattan, and looked explicitly at how the units, so how housing might begin to coalesce and connect across the site to create this vertical forest, and really getting into, again, the details of how those individual units come together. There's a few others she had, I'll just show a few of them here, and also how by elevating this off the ground, she could begin to create urban space and connect. That was one of the requirements for the project, was to create a park within the site, as well as adding density. So really integrating ideas of park and civic life with private life. And this is one of the final renderings here. Integrative Design Studio is one that in the new curriculum, it's in the second semester, although again, I think we're fairly integrative in the first semester, just a different definition. But really, how do you begin to take a design idea, so from a massing standpoint, to begin to create architectonic drawings, such as a building elevation with the implied or inherent complexity of the structure, structural system, bay sizing, envelope, etc. Looking at systems, how the structural systems might begin to work together. This student was looking at a gray water system for water collection and cleaning it, as well as HVAC systems and vertical conveyance systems. And then also getting into, not stopping there, but getting into how this, I would consider this brutalist architecture, how it begins to come together, and how you might begin to detail that with also some insulation. And then a tall building studio that I taught, I think this is now 3 or 4 years ago. This was actually part of an ACSA competition. So the students, we had we had 10 students total. They're all working independently. Some of them, this was their last studio in grad school, their last topical. And the requirements were for 4 20-inch by 20-inch boards and some models, some pretty heavily detailed models. But we worked with an engineer from Ove Arup and architects from Renzo Pianos and a few other places, where they were, again, taking, we went to LA, we visited, they chose one of 4 sites to work on it, and beginning to think about how to complexly create, both design the program and diagram, complexity within these simple diagrams here, and then begin to think about how to stack that program on a site and also how to structure it. This is some of the kind of beautiful models that they did, these kind of large scale bay models back when we used to build models pre-COVID. And then this is actually one of probably, well, I guess you could say it's the best project in the class. It actually won the international ACSA AISC competition. So Mario Ramos, I think he was awarded like $3,000 for this, for his work on this project. And again, it's just, I think, something to say, like, I think the students that are in the graduate program, the focus that they have are are really amazing. And I think you can really do as much as you want and kind of take your research in specific directions, whether you go these different routes of UCD or other things, or focus more on tectonics and technology. So that's my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Brian Brummett texted me a picture of his blue screen. So his computer has crashed, unfortunately. So I've asked Dr. Zook to go ahead and make her presentation now. And if Brian can join us, he will do that for the discussion by his phone.
Okay, thank you, Professor Wade. All right. So I am going to talk a little bit about design for health. It's an area in which our MARC program has a certificate. We also have an MS. That's kind of a different beast. I'm guessing most of you aren't looking at it. Design for health is a field that is in a great deal of flux right now. And it's kind of an exciting time to be part of it. It's not just COVID, although that would be the big change that really nobody could miss at this point, that we're sort of talking about health and aware of health in different ways, but it actually predated that. Even 50 years ago, a diagnosis of an illness was a death sentence for many illnesses, certainly 100 years ago. And so the healthcare buildings were initially set up for sorting people into lines. Some would be savable by medical technology and most would be there to die. It's not the case anymore. We're really dealing with people who are living a long time with chronic conditions. And so the buildings we have and the challenge ahead of us are actually really ill-matched. So this is a field that's changing, and it's a field in need of ideas. I'm not here to necessarily try to sell you on design for health, but I do want to sort of expose you to some of the things that people who work in this field enjoy, things that their qualities that make this field enjoyable for them, and a little bit of what we do at Texas Tech. I would say that people who enjoy working in design for health often say things like architecture is supposed to improve people's lives, and they mean it. There's a, with a straight face, they mean it. And they recognize that when you work with healthcare architecture, you are really designing for people in extreme states. They're very relieved. They're very saddened. They're dealing with a tragedy. They're dealing with a triumph. They're dealing with an emotional condition that's accompanied by strong emotions. So this is a design by a student named Maria Lopez. She's currently in our graduate program, and she was designing a long-term care center, which is colloquially known as a nursing home. And she took this extremely empathetic approach of developing her design around a particular person. She put a face to the person. So to somebody who lives here, it's not a long-term care center, it's their home. And that was the way she really organized how she thought about and how she designed what makes a good home. What are the attributes of a home that you can bring into something that doesn't have all of the morphology of a home? How can you keep a place safe without making it overly institutional? But in addition to sort of having that way of liking to enjoy oneself, projecting into the emotional states of others, people who work in design and health usually have to be comfortable being systematic in their judgments, which means when you go to take a decision about how to design something, you kind of have to systematically think through how it's going to affect a bunch of other kinds of people dealing with other kinds of situations. If there's any kind of space that looks like one thing to one user group and a totally different thing to another user group, is healthcare space. A room can look different pre and post extreme pain to the same person. You may have had that experience. I know I have. So between the empathy and the systematic thinking, that's a particular kind of person who can really enjoy working in this field. And it is in some sense a deeply architectural field, because that's what we do. We're not completely artists, we're not completely technologists, we're not completely involved in the social realm. We're trying to go deep into all of them and bring them together into something coherent. So this was an analysis of how a hallway, which seems like a pretty straightforward situation, would appear to people with different vision conditions. And you'll notice in the two right-hand columns, you're actually starting to deal with trip hazards because the way that the hallway is loaded with stuff and the way that some people would see it would introduce those kinds of risks to the building's users. The other thing that we're dealing with in healthcare, and I kind of alluded to this previously, is the baggage of history. So schools, believe it or not, prisons, and healthcare architecture all have a common ancestor in the workhouse, which was basically a form of prison for people who didn't have very much money. And so we still have this depersonalizing tradition kind of built into the way that we do things. Corridors are for surveilling people and controlling them, and patients are sort of disempowered. And now, if you're in a coma in an ICU, it doesn't matter, but so much of healthcare is moving away from that kind of patient. And so there is the need for people to think again about how we might structure spaces and how we might create forms that deal with the problems that we have now. And this is where this is a field that's really open. I'll say a couple of things. I have a healthcare design and research consultancy. It's really active. And this is one of the communities in the design world where it's not who you know, it's what you know. It really is. More than other fields that I've dealt with. This is a field in search of solutions. This is a field in search of good ideas. This is a field in search of new people, young people, to help make it more effective. So this is some various student work. We were looking at rural health, which is a particularly interesting can of worms because healthcare is usually about a lot of people in one place, and then you can manage to do a hospital. What do you do when the people are spread out so thinly? And like I had 7 groups of students, and they all came up with really interesting new building types. We are one of only 4 national certificate programs in healthcare design. That's part of a professional degree program. And the main people working in this from our college are myself, Lisa Lim, and Saif Haq. All of us are PhD holders. As it happens, we all hold PhDs from Georgia Tech, but we didn't particularly overlap or know each other until we arrived here. As you can see on the right, we are the most, we're the most cost efficient one. We're the least expensive one of all of them, especially if you're out of state in any of these states. But even just sort of the in-state base price. This is the U.S. News and World Report tuition dollars. They might be slightly off from graduate tuition dollars. But it's probably roughly correct. So we're a small field of people who have more than a class or 2 on healthcare, but who have proper programs, which is 1 studio and 3 electives. And you have the choice to take the electives inside the College of Architecture or across campus. You can take them in public health, you can take them in the nursing college, you can take them in Department of Design if you're interested in researching interior design in particular. We also are, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back here for a second. I want to tell you that if you take the certificate program, there's usually 1 or 2 opportunities a year where you can go to a design competition. You're funded to go somewhere, maybe just for 2 days, maybe for up to 4 days. And we compete with these schools and other schools, and it's a timed charrette, usually 48 hours, sometimes a little shorter. And you go sit in a room, which is inevitably air conditioned to morgue temperatures, and they bring you food and they bring you snacks, and you and your friends get a little loopy working on a project. We are always really good performers. We are not as, we're better designers than the other schools in general, and we're a little more innovative. We also graduate students, a lot of the large firms will have a first-year fellowship for graduating students where they take you into their healthcare studio and they give you a little time and a little money to conduct a research project. which coming out of school might not sound like a huge treat to you, but the good thing about it career-wise is you start with a big boost. You're not sort of toiling in obscurity, picking up red lines. You're actually someone people know and that people are bringing to the table early on. So we've had a couple, this is the kind of thing where if you seek these out, Lisa, myself, and Saif will help you write a really strong case. Another attribute of our college is that we are really working to lead the development of knowledge about these spaces. Between the three of us, we either have partnerships or actively we are seeking research grants about healthcare design from these entities, the Department of Health, the VA, the National Endowment for the Humanities. There's a really interesting project I'm spearheading around what is the relationship between what we do as designers and what is the history of the kinds of projects that we work with. Not as architects look at history, but as historians do, and they're up in our space and they know much more about us than we realize. So there's a lot of room for some productive crosstalk there. National Institutes of Health. There is an amazing organization in Seoul called the Architecture and Urban Research Institute that Lisa Lim is involved with, and she's also involved with Mayo Clinic, which may or may not be impressive to you, but it's really the best healthcare system in the world. So my personal feeling is that I have a daughter who's about your age and she's in college, and I'll advise you as I would her, don't trust people who are not willing to talk about money with you when that's something that's at stake. Healthcare is 17.7% of our gross domestic product. Put in sort of everyday terms, for every dollar that's out there floating around in the economy, almost 20 cents ends up in healthcare. That's not good. That means that our healthcare system that's why it's so expensive, that's why it's so inefficient. But for you as a graduating student, it could be kind of good. The national average salaries, these are from ZipRecruiter. This is self-reported data. There's probably better data somewhere, but this is what I could find. The national average is quite a bit higher, notably higher if you work in healthcare than if you work in other fields of architecture. And see, as you go up to the right of that table, it starts to even out. It becomes that, you know, the top people in the field are earning, you know, low, middle six figures. But what I think could be really relevant to you is the left side of the distribution. So in general, as an architect, the lowest bin of salary startup is $36,000. Whereas in healthcare, it's almost twice that, it's $60,000. And so if you're dealing with starting a family, repaying student loans, moving to a metropolitan area that has more expensive housing costs than Lubbock, these kinds of things make a difference. And I also think it's in the first, you know, decade or so of people's careers where they decide that they're going to stay on, license, progress in the profession, or where they decide, you know, maybe something else for me. So I think that this is a, you know, there's nothing wrong with making your stability and your earnings as an architect part of how you consider your career. So look forward to your questions in a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zook. Brian Brummett is actually back with us, but he is without graphics. I've asked him if he would mind just taking a few minutes to discuss his experience as a student before we go into questions.
Yes, so apologize for that. 7-8 year computer sometimes doesn't totally work with the new technologies and square rectangles that we have nowadays. But I do have a very condensed, like 2-3 slides about these questions and really like the social aspect of being a graduate student here at Texas Tech. I believe that will work. So let me go ahead and try to share that real quick. Here we go. Okay, cool. So at the graduate level, there's a lot more collaboration, and it's between the professors and the students. At this level, there's a lot more of a dynamic relationship between the professor and the student. It's extremely fun. It's extremely innovative and inventive. There's you can expect the studio to be very rigorous, but also very lighthearted at the same time. We all know Professor Neiman, and those of you who don't know Professor Neiman, he can be kind of animated at some portions. But when you get to the graduate level, he's a whole different animal. And I stepped out of the elevator one day and I was walking down the hall and I saw Dr. Zook, and I said, you better be ready, because Neiman just brought a trumpet into class and I have no idea. It came out of nowhere. Like, we were talking about like structure, and then the next day he brings a trumpet. And so as we turn the corner, we hear this extreme, just high screech, just out of nowhere, out of tune. And I walk in and I see Professor Neiman standing in front of 4 people, only 4 people, just trying his best to play this trumpet. And I said, Professor Neiman, you gotta be pretty rusty. He's like, I'm not rusty, it's the trumpet. I haven't played it in 30 years. I was like, where did you get this? He's like, I brought it from high school. So it's like, this is great. And that was actually one of his studios where we used music as a vehicle for architecture. We listened to jazz and we designed this massive campus. And so he brought us through these steps. And the collaboration between him was amazing, because at this graduate level, you're not working to produce work for the professor, it's for you. And the professor has stake in your work as well. So those were some of the best moments ever. I will always look back at that. And between the students, you're not only doing individual work, you're doing group work. Everything from inside of class, outside of class, to a photo here that I did under my certificate was just a quick charrette. We jumped into this to design a new facility here in Lubbock, just as graduate students, just to have a design under our belt. See if it will move into the next one. One thing I will say, we have a lot of post-professional certificates. We have about 5, I believe. The Urban and Community Design, which is the one that I'm in, is also referred to as the UCD certificate. We have Land Arts, the American West, Health and Wellness Design, Healthcare Facilities Design, Digital Design and Fabrication. The UCD certificates work so closely with Dr. Stefani here. It's about specialization, urban development, and its impacts on people. It kind of oscillates scales between the micro neighborhoods and the macro infrastructure. You start going into different climates and sustainability, local law and policy. And the opportunities that I actually got from this were from the coursework, going in and volunteering with nonprofits, working out different needs. And out of that actually came a new design for their facilities that was a part of my coursework. And so it ranges from the master planning, civic buildings, local governments, and even stadium design, because you're dealing with such a dense amount of population and infrastructure that starts to try to negotiate the world that we start to live in. One thing that I loved about doing this certificate for me was moving into the public sector. Because I had this certificate, I've worked in firms that did public and private buildings. So we did educational buildings, master planning, city proposals, a lot of good stuff and opportunities that come out of that. With job opportunities from the graduate program, we have large career fairs, multi-days. You guys have probably seen them going on. We also get invites to the Texas Tech career fairs. There's about 2 or 3 extra career fairs that afford you the opportunity to actually look at architecture beyond the realm of just design. You can even go into engineering, into construction. While you're at school, all the job opportunities that you can do graphic design within school. There's internships that help network you outside of the school, research assistants, graduate assistants, teaching assistants, and like Dr. Zook said, there's teaching fellowships. There's tons of teaching fellowships. And when you get to the graduate level, the graduate school will actually endorse you on some of these fellowships that help promote you into your career. So there's a lot of research that needs to be done, and is at Texas Tech, I believe, is at the forefront of it. We're at the highest possible tier for our research here at TTU. And so with that, you have tons of opportunity to be a research assistant under these fantastic professors and doctors here. So I'd highly encourage you to do that, because when you become a research assistant, you learn the field, you learn the people that are in the fields, and that opens up a lot of doors for future networking. It's part of some of this just quick studios that I've been through, as some of the ranging from like residential design to the jazz institutions to prototypes, understanding purposeful forms and just what those forms start to do and how we react to them. and then even working on the periphery of architecture and mapping out ecological and changes through society at this macro level. So there's a lot of research that I think you can put into your own work that you will benefit from. So it's been extremely exciting, and the breadth of work and the amount, the spectrum of which we conduct our work at is extremely vast. And so that's something I've been very grateful for.
Thank you, Brian. Let's take a few minutes and field questions for those of you who have made presentations on the panel, and Dr. Epstein-Jones, and of course Jim, if you'd like to be a part of this too, be happy to have everyone contribute to the answers to any questions that might be there. Are there any of you that would like to post a question on chat real quick? In the meantime, I've got a starter question for you, and that is, with all of the emphasis that seems to be, and especially in big firms, and even some of the smaller ones with emphasis on research, how do you see the research you're doing applying to becoming an architect in the 21st century?
I'm sorry, are you asking about applying to schools or applying for jobs in the future, or?
What role does research play in the architect of the 21st century? The research that's going in grad school and that kind of thing.
Well, it is the 21st century. I mean, the 21st century architectural field has truly changed, and that's what I was showing by this project, but on the sort of the cusp of the 21st century. Robotics are now an industry standard. The use of AR and VR are now industry standards. The use of detailed research about the climate, about the settings that architecture occurs in, any of the architecture work that anybody would be interested in doing in an urban, in a sort of high scale urban setting will require more technological types of research. But it also spans, to the most kind of urban rural remediation research. I'm currently on an NSF grant about, rural building types. So it is the 21st century. I mean, knowledge is just advanced that way. It's become much more much more expanded within each architectural project. There's really no such thing anymore as a kind of like, oh, the project you go out and you just kind of build by hand in that way. Those are pretty rare. And the fact is that the employers out there and the future is now. It's already happening. And, students need to be, prepared to enter the professional field with the skills that will allow them to participate. And, I urge students, to visit architectural offices if they can, and and I think that they do this in the professional practice class. They go through some of the architectural offices, but they do this in study abroad as well. Look at different architectural offices, because you see, like, you go to an office like Gensler, and Gensler is nothing but research pods. It's not like there's a person designing at a desk with a Mayline and and a pencil or anything like that. There are research pods, and those research pods are dedicated to different areas of the project, from everything from the materials, sustainability of the project, the citing of the project, the context and some of the social parameters of the project, the political parameters of a project, and all of that knowledge is architectural knowledge. And that's just where the profession, is at this point. And, and I think it's good that to go to a school that's paying attention in a very detailed and specific way to the needs of the profession. Jim,
Thanks.
I'm sure you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think I can be a little bit more specific. Uh, uh, Over the summer and even before the summer, I began to canvass quite a few of our most successful alumni. It included people like Barry Hand, who at one point headed the research unit at Gensler in Dallas. Jay Tatum, who is the director of HOK's office in Houston. Even Chris Huckabee, who is the chairman of the Texas Tech Board of Regents. And this is, and there were others, of course, but basically, from their point of view, uh, there are things that are important maybe for you to know. One is they don't believe they can survive without doing research. And the reason for that is, um, if I were to quote Chris Huckabee, that doing research, and they sponsor a research unit in Waco at Baylor, doing research allows them to convince their clients that their money is well spent. And Barry Hand at Gensler would basically say Gensler would just not be the largest architecture firm in the world if it couldn't support its work with research. Now, I think the other thing that's needed to be said is this: it's not that every architect that comes out of a school needs to be a totally dedicated researcher, but the important thing is that you have had some experience doing research, that you have some facility in doing research, and that you can talk to others who may be more active in research than you might be. So if you can either do research or you can talk the language of research and rather be a designer who can speak the language of research, but you're going to have to be involved in research. You're going to have to be, fluent in it in some way, or you're going to find, you may not be as marketable a young man or woman as you might want to be, and part of the scary thing is, and I don't mean to be scary, is some of these people that I've spoken to. And by the way, Chris Huckabee doesn't only have a research unit that they sponsor in Waco. They have their own lobbyists doing research in their office. There's a feeling out there that firms that don't have a capacity to do research will not be as prevalent in the next 10 to 20 years as they might be now, because clients are demanding, an ability to support the design work that they're doing. So it's I don't want people to hear this conversation and think that, all we want you to do is become researchers. What this is about you being able to be leaders in the field and operate successfully in the field.
Thank you, Jim. We have a question for Kalechi and Brian about the graduate comprehensive exam. Can you tell us about your experience there?
Yes, the GCE was it's not as scary as some might think. It's actually very fun. It's time for reflection, I believe, because when you go through a GCE, especially when in this time of the rectangles, you present a digital archive of your past work. And so, and it typically happens in your second year, first semester of graduate school. And you place different projects in order to show that you've met the criteria to graduate. which can seem very daunting and kind of stressful, but you're prepared every single studio by your guides, by your professors, so that any type of criteria, whether that be academic or professional, at least I 100% felt prepared. So when I was going through the GCE, for me, it wasn't a stressful moment of like, oh my gosh, am I going to hit this criteria? It was actually more of reflection. And doing the GCE actually helped me with the next and coming studio, because I was able to reflect on not having to produce the work, but just looking at the work that I had done, learning from it, and then placing it up for review, which happens, I think, between 2 or 3 professors, and you just present the work that you have been doing in grad school. And so it's actually a really fun and nice moment to go through. It's not a stressful exam that you may think of. It's just simple review of the stuff that you've been doing.
Kelechi, would you like to make any comments about that?
Yeah, sure. Kind of the same experience for me. I think going into it, I was really nervous about the outcome and what it was going to be about. But then being participating in it and taking the exam wasn't as daunting as, like Brian said, as I thought it was going to be. It was just kind of a reflective period of all the work that you have done since your first studio, and just a combination of all of that work and showcasing it to a few professors. And you're given a guideline or guideline questions or different criteria that you're required to meet. And so, and then I found that as I went through those criteria, it was very easy for me to kind of pick and pull examples from my different studios where I had met the criteria that were required of me. And then you're presenting it to professors that you probably had for one studio or the other. So it's a pretty interesting and relaxed atmosphere, as opposed to like a review, I would say. So that was my experience. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kelechi. This next question may be best suited to Jim or Dora or Stephen, but anyone who would like to answer it would be fine. The question has to do with financial aid and scholarships as opportunities for existing undergraduate students moving into the graduate program.
Speak a little bit on that.
Yeah, I think you might start, and then Dora and I can fill in.
Sure. So when you apply for the master's program, you are also being considered for financial aid if the department is available to offer any funds to you. So the application is a holistic review, and there's a committee that will review your materials that you submit. And so based on all of that criteria, the faculty will decide on what is available and how much they're able to assist as much students as possible.
We also offer TA-ships. Most of you encountered having a graduate student TA in your first year. That is a position that helps in a number of ways, because you're not only paid for that position, but you also, as I understand, get a tuition reduction in some cases with that. And we have a number of positions available. We also have positions available that are research assistants, and those will also help defray costs. And then finally, and I think that there's an upcoming question on this, there's an international kind of focus in the graduate topical studios. We try to engage at least one topical or 2 topicals per each semester that travel. And when you're in the graduate program, those costs are 100% covered by the College of Architecture. Jim, do you want to add any other?
Well, I just want to clarify, your travel costs and your hotel costs are covered. it's a little difficult for us to cover food costs and you know, if you need a passport, but travel to a country in the country and staying in the country, that is covered. That is something that we've instituted for a couple of reasons. One is that one of the most important things that we're trying to do, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level, is make our students globally aware, which is an increasingly important skill. So we were talking about research earlier, but global awareness and a kind of familiarity with other cultures is extraordinarily important in the workplace. You're likely to be working with an engineer from, well, Peter mentioned Ove Arup. I don't know what office he used, but Ove Arup is originally from London. So you might be working with a London-based engineer, a German, you know, financier. Your client might be from China. So your ability to kind of understand and operate and work with people from different backgrounds and different cultures is really critical, and global awareness is an important part of that.
Thank you. There's a question, an interesting question about the difference between some of the 2 or 3 year MARC programs around that have thesis projects compared to what we offer. Dora, would you mind starting that off?
Sure, sure. So, you know, and we've kicked around, you know, the thesis question, and right now the important thing to recognize that this 2-year program has, well, first, a thesis is basically a way of exploring a topic area that will allow you to build something within your portfolio that then helps, you know, position you into your career. We don't have a thesis option here, but we do have a full year of option studios, and that includes the opportunity in that 2 years to also get a certificate and a certificate of study. And so you can get, we have the different fields, you know, design for health and wellness and health and wellness and urban studies and design and land arts. I said in design, computation, and fabrication are the 5, and you can finish with a certificate. And in a way that accomplishes what many thesis oriented programs accomplish, and then some, because you get an extra credential on your resume or CV, and it helps focus you, and it helps, you know, make you a potential, you know, candidate in, you know, a certain area of the field. And so there's a lot of discussion, you know, currently in academics about the value of thesis versus things like being able to get extra credentials in
Right.
particular fields. And at Texas Tech currently, we have extra credentials, which I think is, you know, a smart way to go. Jim, did you want to add?
Well, I agree that the presence of thesis in a lot of schools is a matter of debate. Quite a few schools still have them. Quite a few schools have gotten rid of them, and quite a few schools have gone to a slightly different model, which is what we might call a thesis studio. And our option studios, especially if they're associated with a certificate, more closely resemble what other schools would call a thesis studio.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, I'd like to wrap up at least the answering of questions for right now, in the interest of everyone's time. However, I would like to encourage those who are attending, if you have questions that you haven't asked yet, please feel free to fill up the chat with those questions, and we will do our very best to answer them in writing and email them to you, the answers to those questions. So please feel free to load this chat up with those. What I'd like to do now is turn the time over to Jim Williamson, our dean, and allow him to close the meeting with whatever comments he'd like to make. I will not need to say anything after Jim is done. We'll just end the meeting with his comments. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Derek. And first of all, thank everyone. Thanks to the students who are attending and to everyone that's participated in the panel and helped put this together. I think it's been really successful. I would encourage students to continue to reach out. If they have any other questions, you can reach out to me, to Dora, to Derek, to the advisors. We want you here, and we want you to be here with confidence. So don't hesitate to continue asking questions, and you know, reach out to us to do so. A lot of things have been mentioned here. Studio travel that is supported, the possibility of teaching assistantships. We have changed the program, and I think it would be important for you to know that the reason we've changed the program is not to put kind of an burden upon you, but to make our program comparable to other programs in the state and in the region. But we have mechanisms by which some of the financial ramifications of that can be handled. For example, in your fourth year, you can take as many as 9 hours that would count towards a graduate degree, which would make a significant impact on the amount of tuition that you'd pay. We have an excellent lecture series. We have an excellent series of symposiums. Our faculty are very, very good. I think you've heard from, the ones that you've heard from today are really very, very good and in the top of their field. And we are bringing more and more faculty like them. So we're positioning the college to be a college that is more prominent and more known. We do not wish in any way to diminish our reputation as a college that prepares people for the workplace, but we want to do more than just provide you with professional competence. We want to provide you with other skills that are going to be needed in the workplace of the 21st century. So we've mentioned a couple of them: global awareness and ability to research. Critical thinking is another one. Collaborativeness has been mentioned. All of those things, in addition to kind of professional preparedness, are going to be the kinds of skills that are needed in the next 10 to 20 years. And so the changes that we brought to the school have really been with that in mind. And maybe even more important than preparing you for the 21st century workplace is this. We want you to be professionally prepared. We want you to have the skills you need for the 21st century. We also want to prepare you more and more to become leaders within the profession. And those are the motivations behind the changes to the program, behind the kinds of faculty that are here, behind the kinds of faculty that we're trying to bring. We have a very diverse set of students, and we're hoping to increase the diversity of our student body. In the end, I think without a doubt, we can be the best school of architecture in this region. In spite of the fact that other schools may be looked on right now a little bit differently. I think we're preparing people as well or better. And I say that with full confidence. So I encourage you to really give us, you know, a review. Really think about being here. We would like you to be here. The more and frankly, the more of you who are in the program, the better the program becomes for all kinds of reasons. So I just want you to know that you're welcome, that we are doing all kinds of things to increase the quality of the program at any number of levels, and that we want you to be part of it. So I think that's, I mean, that'll be my ending message. So thanks again for attending. And again, like I said earlier, by all means, reach out to us. And if you have more questions, we want you to feel confident in your choices. And of course, we want you to come here. So let us know what we can do to help make that happen. Okay. So goodbye, everybody. Have a good evening. And thanks for joining us, and let us know. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone, thank you.